Hello.
Hello again. I would like to start by introducing our speakers today. Let's start with JF, who is joining us today right from the Bay Area, West Coast. Um, JF, with the background in software engineering, could never imagine he would be working with people operations, finance, and marketing. And today he will tell us a lot about psychological safety and his personal experiences. JF, would you like to say a few words before we dive into your story?
Thank you, everyone. I'm Jeff Unson. I'm based out here in Silicon Valley. I've been here in the Valley all my life in terms of my career, and I'm very happy to be here.
And our next speaker for today is Lars Lin. And Lars comes from Denmark. I am very happy to bring Lars in. I have met Lars in other circles. Just like we have Agile community, I have met Lars through exponential organization community. And I am very happy that he agreed to share his experiences and his new initiative in education. So um, hopefully you all will like it. Lars, anything you want to add on that?
Just like JF, I have a nerdy background as well, and I'm also working with human beings today, and I couldn't be more excited about sharing the story here. Thank you so much, Adita and Nadista, for arranging all this and for allowing us to share our new Agile voices. Thank you for having us here.
Wonderful. Well, with that, we can start with JF and your story.
Hello, I'm JF Unson, and let me start by telling you a couple of tales set in Silicon Valley. So, some time ago, a fresh college graduate named Francisco landed his dream job at one of the marquee companies here in Silicon Valley. He was stoked with his technical support engineer position. Here he was helping customers who encountered problems with their specialized hardware that they had purchased. He told himself, wow, I've reached my dream. So, about a month into his new job, some colleagues invited him to have lunch. They grabbed their lunch and proceeded to go into an unused meeting room. The mood was very happy and jovial. In the middle of the conversation, a senior engineer's name at the company was mentioned. All of a sudden, the mood of the engineering director in the room darkened. He suddenly went on a tirade. If I find out I have a damn faggot reporting to me, I'm going to deck him and fire him immediately. The director was referring to the senior engineer who was mentioned. This senior engineer was one of the well-known out and proud engineers at the company. Francisco froze. He couldn't believe it. He had not mentioned anything to his coworkers that he was gay. He was too new and was still trying to build rapport with his teammates. And here he found himself in the middle of a meeting room, all alone, searching around for eyes that would give him a hint that somewhere, someone was an ally. He found none, and so he kept quiet. Most of the people, unfortunately, kept quiet. Some nodded at the director, at what he was saying. Time went by slowly for Francisco while the director's rant went on. Francisco was shaking inside, very nervous and fearful. He was nervous about being found out and exposed as a gay man. Finally, after so long, the meeting adjourned and everyone in the room stood up. Very few were still talking. No one brought up the tirade. It was as if nothing had happened. What did Francisco do? He feigned an excuse to the rest of his colleagues. He went to the bathroom, locking himself in a stall, and he sat there trying to calm himself for a good few minutes. He didn't feel it safe to bring the incident up to anyone, not even to HR, not even to his friend who had referred him. Even though the company had a clause against sexual orientation and discrimination of it, Francisco didn't want to stir the pot. This was his first job, his dream job at one of Silicon Valley's well-known companies. He had a lot of student loans to pay back, and he desperately needed this job. Let's go on to my second tale. My second tale is about John. And like Francisco, he too was a fresh graduate joining the ranks of Silicon Valley engineers. And like Francisco, he landed at his dream company as well. On this particular day, John found himself chatting with one of his customers who called in with a problem. After some debugging, John found out that the customer was doing something that was unsupported. Yes, there were hacks out there on the internet showing how a few people hack things to make it work. Unfortunately, John had to tell the customer that what he was trying to do was not supported, and he couldn't help him debug it. The customer all of a sudden became curt and rude. "I don't like your answer," he told John. "Get me your engineering lead. I want to talk to him." "More than happy to. Let me grab Lorraine. Just give me a moment," said John. "Wait," the customer blurted out. "You mean your engineering lead is a woman?" "Yes," replied John. "I don't want her. Get me another engineering lead. I don't want to talk to a woman." John responded, "Oh, you mean Linda, my other engineering lead. Sure, I can get her." The customer said, "I don't want a woman. Get your manager right now." "Sure," said John. "Let me get my manager, Cindy." So John was sort of, being sly and impish because he didn't like the customers all, especially with the attitude the customer was giving him. He was also waiting for his next response to the customer with a lot of glee. Why? Because in front of John was the company org chart. And there was a line of women going all the way up to in the organization before he could reach a male person of authority, the VP. And just right after the VP was the CEO himself. "I want to talk to your director, not your manager. Get me your director right now," said the customer. And John said, "I'll be more than happy to check if our director, Sharon, is free right now to talk to you." Click, the customer had hung up, and John was smiling impishly. So after these two stories, I'm wondering, what is your reaction to these two tales? Are you aghast, befuddled, incredulous? Do you think these tales are of the past and future of Silicon Valley and tech? That this is a work of fiction? Well, I'm here to tell you that these tales aren't tales at all. They are real. They are my stories. These are my experiences as a fresh college graduate landing his dream job in Silicon Valley. These two incidents happened within the first 2 months of my start just a little over 30 years ago. So what happened? For the first decade or so of my career, I've had a very unique experience compared with most engineers in tech. I didn't realize it then. I probably realized it maybe after about 10, 15 years. For one, the ratio of women who I'd worked with, managers, mentors, engineering leads, the ratio was about 70% women to 30% men. I personally found it very normal to be working with a lot of women engineers. And so did my colleagues to a degree. And I didn't even think about it or notice it. It was par for the course. These women were highly technical, very competent, and brought their A game to the table. Gender was not an issue. Having women on the team was very normal, as I said. Don't misunderstand me here. There was a lack of women in Silicon Valley back then. In the 90s, I would say engineering organizations, and specifically engineering organizations, had about 30% women to 70% men, the opposite of my experience. The organization Women in Tech International was in its second year when I joined the Valley workforce in 1990. But for some strange yet fortunate reason, fate had decided to deal me a unique journey and circumstance that to this day I'm very thankful for experiencing. I only realized that things had drastically changed around the mid-2000s when I noticed dramatically how few women engineers were left in the organization. in the organizations I was working in. Along the same timeline, the first decade of my career was also fraught with fear, uh, primarily because I was a gay man and I didn't want to be found out. When I started, very few companies in the Valley had anti-discrimination clauses for sexual orientation. And you would think that the proximity of San Francisco would have an effect on Silicon Valley's openness at that time. No, it was not the case. People like me could still be fired for being gay, and I didn't even feel safe to bring it up to HR at all, because none of the people in that room saw fit to call out the manager. I couldn't find any allies. A year after that meeting room incident with the director, I remember the first time our company LGBT group walked in as a united front into the cafeteria. We were all nervous and we got a lot of stares as we walked in. We grabbed our food, combined a few tables, and sat together. We were fearful, but we all felt we had to become visible at our company. It was my official coming out publicly at the workplace. Why did we do this? Why did we feel empowered? Well, thanks to umbrella organizations like High Tech Gays and Digital Queers at that time. They rallied all the LGBT employee resource groups in the Valley. They started a movement asking for equal seating at the company table. They gave us, the employees, strategies of how to engage with our own companies and start dialogues with our executives and HR departments. Fast forward 10 years later or so, after that time I walked out with the rest of my peers. This time I was working still in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was roaring its engines again after the dot-com bust. And I ended up working at a startup that successfully went public. And why am I so joyful aside from the fact that this startup went public? Well, this company, our stock ticker price was LGBT. Yes, I was very fortunate to be at the first startup and company to target the LGBT community at the dawn of the internet age as we know it today. Most of the employees were gay and we were as free as birds in the air. Imagine that feeling that you no longer had to hide yourself and you can express yourself as much as possible. And the only judgment was the quality of your work, not who you are or what you are. And interestingly enough, as the first startup, LGBT startup to go public, we were also doing Agile. We were one of the first early startups to do so. What was once fringe methodologies found on net news on the internet became a manifesto. This Agile manifesto started being adopted by various startups in Silicon Valley. Since then, both Silicon Valley and Agile have boomed since the manifesto was published. At that time, Google was just beginning to rise as the first of the few titans of Silicon Valley. And during the mid-2000s, I was very fortunate as one of the first coaches to participate in the first ever enterprise rollout of Agile at Yahoo. Everyone back then, all eyes were on us because no one had this kind of transformation being implemented anywhere. We were the first ever to try and do this at a very large company, very large company. So there were a lot of lessons that I had learned since then. And in those 20 years since the manifesto, in those 15 years since Yahoo, both Silicon Valley and Agile have boomed. Agile has taught a lot of people and companies how to scale up, how to run teams successfully to get products out faster. We have come up with various networks like Scrum at Scale, Nexus, Less, or Safe that help generate billions of dollars for startups. We as a community, as Agilists, have generated a lot of revenue for various consultancies, both big and small, and certifications. In a sense, Silicon Valley and Agile have become a rounding success. But did all of us achieve this at the expense of something else? In the pursuit of value and profit, maybe we forgot one aspect of the manifesto. We left some people out of the ride to success. If Agile values people over process, where are the frameworks and the tools that can help organizations, teams, and coaches become more diverse and inclusive? It seems that Agile has become very business-centric and has forgotten the human-centric part of the manifesto, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion. As Agilists, we have all learned how to create psychologically safe spaces for our retrospectives. We all agree we need to create conditions where it's okay to fail and learn. There has been an uptick with meetups on psychological safety, but very few tackle the nuances of safety when it comes to diversity and inclusion. I see just a few people attending or participating when it comes to topics of diversity and inclusion at the Agile conferences or at various meetups. Even when a well-known Agilist at a conference talks about diversity and inclusion issues in the Agile world, I often hear attendees immediately say, this isn't the talk I signed up for. And when I politely point out, this type of response is the reason why we need these kinds of talks in Agile, I immediately get pushback. I'm either told, you're being too sensitive, JF, or you're being very condescending. So what happened to the mantra of being curious without being judgmental that we ask of all Agilists, especially when the topics of diversity and inclusion come up? It seems, like I said, that Agile over the years has not given the community the tools to handle the diverse voices or the practices of how to be inclusive of views and issues that make us uncomfortable. You might be asking, well, isn't this an HR issue? What does it have to do with Agile? Well, unfortunately, as Agilists, it is our issue, not just HR. Why? Because HR is an integral part of the equation for organizational agility. HR is where Agile can help best when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Based on what I've experienced in Silicon Valley, most of the time, HR is there to support the business first and foremost, and people are secondary. You've heard all of the stories in the news about Uber's sexist culture or Google's manifesto against women. Witness all the generous severance packages of execs who left under dubious circumstances. These are the stories that got out, mind you, that you hear about in the news. There are a lot of stories that haven't made it out. Why? Because HR is there to do damage control so the business can continue. So how can we truly achieve organizational agility if as Agilists, we don't find ways of working to help HR and entire organizations address these kinds of problems? And even if companies are able to recruit and hire diverse people, how can we help these organizations, HR, be more inclusive, allowing the diverse voices to be heard and not force people to conform and be the same once they join a company? And I'm not just talking about usual boxes of race, gender, sexual orientation. I'm including other areas like company culture, neurodiversity, physical enablement, or cognitive diversity. Here's an example. At another startup, we interviewed this engineer, and everyone, including the CEO, nixed this engineer. I overrode them all. Why did they nix this engineer? Because they said he was not a cultural fit. But I saw something different in there. I saw he was a good engineer and there was a lot of potential. I overrode them all, hired him, and he turned out to be one of the best hires I've had at that startup. Not only was he one of the best hires I've had, he was also one of the best mentors for other junior engineers. That goes to show you how diversity and inclusion can help you in organizational agility. Diversity and inclusion are connected but separate problems, and all these agile scaling frameworks have little or almost nothing to adequately address this 20-year-old problem. There's a quote that I often hear nowadays that says that culture eats strategy every time. If that is true, Agile needs to step up more to the plate when it comes to the culture of diversity and inclusion in an organization. One of the reasons why Silicon Valley became more supportive of the LGBT community is because there was a united effort to get equal seating at the table, and umbrella organizations like Digital Queers and High Tech Gays helped and rallied every LGBT resource group in the Valley to ask for equal seating. As an Agile coach, I've been taught the mindset, given all the tools, learned the methods and frameworks to scale teams, the engineering practices to help me ship code in seconds so that a company can generate a lot of money in returns quickly. But when it comes to coaching for the harder topics of psychological safety, when it comes to scaling of diverse and inclusive teams, or dealing with microaggressions and power dynamics of leaders, individuals, teams, and entire organizations when it comes to diverse opinions, there's very little out there in terms of a united effort from the Agile movement and community. 20 years ago, a meetup was held in Snowbird, Utah, and the Agile Manifesto was born. After more than 20 years, maybe it's time to reconvene another meetup. Maybe it's time to relook at the manifesto and come up with new ways of working to solve diversity and inclusivity. And if this happens, maybe it's time we actually include more diverse voices in the update of our Agile Manifesto. So here's the challenge. Why won't you join me and a few others in figuring this out and helping change the narrative of Agile once again? Thank you.
Wow.
Wow.
Jeff, that is so authentic, because it is your true stories, your true experience. And to pile up a little bit on Anya's session from yesterday, not everyone has gone through that. Not everyone has been in your shoes. So for you to share that with us, thank you. Thank you for being so vulnerable. Thank you for being so courageous to bring that to us.
Yes,
have
we've
some
seen that
questions.
before. And just rewatching it again just gave me so many goosebumps. Thank you for your passion and openness.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have some questions for you, and everyone that is listening, feel free to post them on the chat. Let's start with what can business leaders do, and probably not just business leaders, but leaders on all levels do to enable psychological safety. To your point earlier, HR is there to help and to protect the business and everything, but if leaders are doing the right thing on all levels, there's no need for any protection, right? So
Or
what
damage control,
right.
as you framed it. Mm-hmm.
So what would you, something tactical, something really concrete? And you are on mute.
Sorry about that. One of the key things I think that business leaders can do is practice empathy, right? In order to understand, especially people who are below them. There's a little bit of a power dynamic involved here. When you are talking to a leader, there's already stress as a person when you're talking to them. And so, as a leader, I would suggest to practice empathy is one,
Mhm.
and practice that behavior. Leaders sometimes don't feel comfortable practicing empathy because it might look weak in their peers' eyes. And I'm like, why? It's not about weakness here. It's about understanding and putting yourself in another person's shoes to build more context. And once you start building that, you can feel potentially what the other person is going through. So, as a practical sort of sense, is to practice more empathy. Don't be don't don't be so reactive, especially when people come up to leaders. Leaders immediately like, I need to respond. Well, sometimes responding is not necessarily the right thing to do. It might just be listening. And that is a form of empathy that I think that people,
Mhm.
right? The other aspect that is very quick win for leaders is look at the values that your company espouses, and do your behaviors reflect those values? Because once those disconnect, then people are all of a sudden closed to you as a leader, right? You
Mm.
say one thing but do another. I've seen many leaders, for example, say, we value our people so much because they're the best resource for the company. They make us successful. And yet some leaders expect you to answer their Slack message at 4 a.m. in the morning when they're up.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
a sign of valuing your people. So
Respecting, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, JF. I would like to offer one more question. And topics of diversity and inclusion might be very sensitive to people, right? And people naturally might not feel at ease with things that they're not familiar with, like experiences that you shared.
yes.
Not even knowing how to handle this kind of conversations. And we know from open space that Agile community practices a lot the law of 2 feet, where
Yeah.
people feel free to move away from conversations where they don't feel like they're adding value or getting value from. So
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you can help us understand what is the way of framing the conversations around the topics you mentioned in a way that people could see the value of being uncomfortable?
That is an awesome question, Nadezhda. So let me go back to one of the things you said, what it makes it valuable, right? And part of the value here is being able to convey people why you want, what does diversity bring? In the example that I mentioned in my video, cultural fit is one thing that a lot of people, for example, um, cherish when they hire. But the problem with cultural fit is that you hire for sameness. And when you hire for sameness, you have an echo chamber where your ideas are not challenged, right? But if you are able to challenge some of the ideas and bring a new perspective, you open up a whole new world of possibilities because of just the way you manage those tensions effectively. And I think being able to show that value is what's necessary in order to make people be aware that this is a key factor in increasing the value of your company and your and potentially your product, because the more perspectives you have, the wider your customers you can potentially target, right? The other aspect is that these are definitely very hard questions, and you will be uncomfortable as much as you want. It's a really good idea to have someone who is removed from the group to be able to facilitate and provide a space. One of the key things about retrospectives, for example, is the invitation. We're inviting here where there is no blame. We're here to find answers and context. If you establish that kind of invitation to these kinds of discussions, that it's all about learning and opening up the mind and figuring out a solution that we as an organization or as a team can do, that helps in sort of um, alleviating some of the fears, right? Mind you, it is always hard and difficult, but it is when we face hard and difficult situations and figure out solutions, that's when we grow most, right? I remember, for example, my first program in C++. I hated multiple pointers pointing everywhere. I was doing X11 programming back in the day. After about a year, I was so comfortable with it, I could do it in my sleep, right? It was daunting at first, but then over time, as I worked at it and started understanding it more, I became comfortable with it. And that's the same with some of these harder topics.
Thank you, JF. your talk, your answers open up so much brave space. And I wish for us, for all of us, to create and shape spaces where we're truly seen and heard and appreciated for who we are.
Yes, that
Yeah.
is the, yeah, creating those safe spaces.
Thank you, JF, for joining us and for sharing this on our very first new Agile Voices.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you both, and thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Next up is the presentation from Lars.
Even when 1,000 experts agree, who says they're right? It's often said that all grand challenges in the world can be solved through education. I used to say that as well, but we are wrong. The experts are wrong too. It's become apparent that our education system is never going to deliver on the UN Sustainable Development Goals for quality education. We've built an extremely costly and ineffective system in a world that's changing very fast. We need agility and creativity to solve the biggest challenges for our planet. Let's get back to this in a moment. I'm Lars Ling Villebæk. I'm very happy to be here as your new Agile voice. I'm an electronics engineer by education, a transformation coach by choice, and Danish mainly by accident of birth, although I love being a Dane. I grew up in a beautiful little town. It was safe, surrounded by stunning nature. I could do my favorite sports activities and finish my upper secondary education before I left town to join the army. I kind of always knew I would turn my interest in technology into my profession and hopefully travel the world too. Let me spare you from 50 years of personal stories. I'm here to give you just the part of my story that connects me deeply to an education-related problem I'm working on solving. I'll try to make my story as quick as it felt turning 50 years old from being that teenager back in my hometown in Denmark. One minute you're young and believing you will live forever, the next you're turning down the car radio so you can see better, right? So the last 25 years I've been working in technical and commercial and leadership roles in a number of large multinational enterprises. And I've been building tech startups as an entrepreneur. What I discovered very early in my career path was this very satisfying feeling of enabling new types of solutions to solve human problems. I've been in that intersection of cutting-edge technology and positive impact all my life. But in the past 15 years, I've also been adding business model, innovation dimensions, and lean and agile methodologies to my toolbox. Now, being a father of two boys, soon turning 10 and 12 years old, I'm again facing the very same education system, but this time as a parent. The world we live in has changed dramatically in the past decades, but I'm really shocked to see how little schools have changed in the past 35 years. Blackboards have been replaced by smartboards, but I don't see much other change. I hope this is not an unfair comparison. I'm not here to criticize education or schools or the millions of wonderful, hard-working human beings working and studying in schools every day. Quite the contrary. I believe that we need to protect the interests of our kids. And I would argue our kids need to live meaningful lives. They need to understand how they each fit into our world, how they contribute to the greater good, and how they grow together while accomplishing their dreams and goals. And as the world changes, we need to change along with it. Education and schools and how they work are very different from country to country, obviously, even from school district to school district within the same country. And some access have no access to schools at all. Others have cutting-edge schools with the most advanced technologies and state-of-the-art facilities and plenty of support around them. Tuition fees vary from nothing in publicly funded schools to crazy tuition fees. $700 billion per year is what the US alone spent on public education. Let me airdrop just a few statistics from UNESCO and the World Economic Forum on how we are currently doing on the educational journey to free, equitable, and quality education for all. About 250 million learners globally finish their schooling without learning to read and write. The US counts 1.3 million high school dropouts annually, 50% of them citing boredom as the main reason of leaving. Some of the fastest growing tech companies establish their own universities because they cannot really source the skills and competences they need from the market, from the educational institutions. Skills such as machine learning, training of artificial intelligence for supporting human beings better, and other 21st century skills that are not in any national educational curriculum. How do we coexist with technology? How do we collaborate virtually without having to face a decline in our mental well-being, just like we have experienced during the COVID lockdown? There's a lot more we need to learn as human beings. A few of the UN Sustainable Development Goals for quality education are: by 2030 to ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education, leading to relevant and effective learning outcomes. And ensure that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development, care, and pre-primary education so they are ready for the primary education. And ensure equal access for all women and men to affordable and quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, including university. And substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills for employment, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship. There are many, many more objectives on this list, but it's clear we are very far from accomplishing these goals. In my own case, we're privileged as a family. We live in Denmark. The school system is free mostly, and it's pretty good compared to many other countries. Our challenge as a family was that we saw our oldest son struggling to focus and follow the activities when he was in a classroom environment with the noise, smell, lots of other students right around him. Turns out he's in the very broad category of non-neurotypical learners, along with about 25% of the global population, by the way. He's an autist, others have other health disorders, some are dyslexic. Many people fit into this broad category. Every one of us is actually somewhere on what's called the autism spectrum, so allow me to say that statistically 1 or 4 in every classroom will struggle or find it impossible to accomplish standardized learning goals for school curriculum in a traditional learning environment, at least without personalized support. The statistics for these groups show very depressing trends, shows that they are not doing well in the education system. Let's consider that part as well. Now back to my story. What happened was I had to ventilate my frustrations from these school experiences somewhere, and I did so in a community much like this Agile community that's hosting us today. Except the focus of this community was not about Agile principles and values specifically, it's about transforming the world for a better future. And I know you see many similarities right away anyway about what you are doing. That's fantastic. This community I've been part of growing since 2016 is openexo.com. Over 8,000 of us are working in all sorts of organizations and institutions to transform mindsets from scarcity, where we have limited resources and time to accomplish goals, to an abundance mindset, where every human being on the planet technically could be a passionate resource for your mission if you share similar purpose and aspirations. We also factor in how different business models and exponential technologies can play a role in helping you have your positive impact on the world faster and better than ever before. As part of all this, we have specialized in how you can effectively test and launch disruptive innovation without that innovation being attacked by the immune system of the organization. This while you at the same time adapt the core of your organization to the accelerating pace of change in the world outside. I knew that if I wanted to make significant change to education, the reaction likely would be the same as if you attempt to launch disruptive innovation in your organization. Your organization's immune system will see your initiative as an intruding virus and attack it. And the attack is understandable because the disruptive initiative can potentially damage or kill the core of your business if it's successful. Same with what I'm trying. Given I've been designing and running these transformation processes for a long time, I had the toolbox to give it a shot. And I have quite a lot of experience from working with Agile as well. So it was just about getting started. But to avoid getting attacked if we came up with too disruptive ideas, we needed a place to play. So I decided to launch a virtual community for this called Educate for Life. This is a playground for ideation and with incubation services as part of it. The community launch happened really to a large degree thanks to the many community members and friends from OpenExO that insisted this had to be done. They wanted to be part of it. So in 2019, I facilitated a community-driven 12-week-long sprint to co-ideate and to pitch at the end of the sprint to each other. It worked very well. Many great initiatives were created, and we did it again in 2020. This time the theme was empowerment of kids, and it worked equally well. We saw a new group self-form, everyone from different continents, but everybody deeply committed and passionate about developing new paradigms to one day replace education, or at least be a great alternative for those families that need this. We want to put the kids and the families back in charge of their own learning and their own destiny. In March 2020, our community sprint had finished. We had a first set of hypotheses to work on as a team to empower children. At that time, COVID had locked the whole world down. Many of you will still be facing these tough restrictions. My life here in Denmark, fortunately, has become a lot easier. Our COVID restrictions have currently been lifted. We could concentrate on simply connecting kids online around the world. They were stuck at home with busy parents trying to get their work done, with schools struggling to figure out how to support their students remotely. Thanks to the internet and some great collaboration tools, we could launch our program pretty much instantly. We did so under the name Planet Pilots. And needless to say, the first round of activities we did with the kids was about COVID. How COVID is impacting different professions. And in a design-like sprint, the kids came up with different solutions that could help these different professions. The motivation was sky high for the kids, and we knew we had to roll this out to other families as quickly as possible. While all this is happening, the United Nations recently reported that COVID-19 has wiped out 20 years of educational gains around the world. Not only do I have strong personal drivers to create new paradigms and better personalized support for learners, but it's also evident that the existing education system is facing significant threats and challenges. The Brookings Institute described what they call the 100-year gap. That's the time it takes for the world's poor children to achieve educational parity with the wealthy at today's pace if we continue the current education system. An education system should be able to, in my opinion, to make us feel that we can accomplish anything we set our minds to and nothing can stop us. But that's not what we get from education today. So how else can we get it? How can each child grow their empowering beliefs by accomplishing goals that are important to them personally? How do we best prepare our youngest generations to work in a variety of different international teams across borders, across cultures, to a large extent virtually? How do we best prepare our kids to coexist in an empowering symbiosis with technologies such as AI? This is all part of what we need in the world we live in already today. We are going through a radical change of our world these coming years, unlike any pace of change ever seen before. We have the opportunity to solve most, if not all, of the global challenges, but it requires collaboration. It requires new skills and capabilities successfully to steer our planet into a better future. This is what we believe strongly in doing in our way. That's what we are doing with 8 to 12-year-olds at Planet Pilots. The Planet Pilots are on a mission to empower children to manage a healthy planet. It's a mission that's giving everybody equal opportunity at low or zero cost as they engage in their own journey of self-discovery, real-life accomplishments from a very early age. Because they can create a better world that they want to live in. For those who desire an academic career with the traditional well-known credentials, diplomas, degrees, we really encourage them to make that their accomplishment. We need them in our world. Many of our Planet Pilots are attending school too while being Planet Pilots. The big objective for us is to establish an alternative path to empowerment rather than traditional education, to support each child in growing their own empowering beliefs and making real-world accomplishments from the first day they join us. What do you want to be when you grow up? It's a question we too often ask our kids. Instead, ask them, what do you want to be today? And what problem are you working on solving today? This generates an enormous and satisfying intrinsic motivation to learn and to accomplish. We see this happening every day. It works. The step to do it together with others from any culture, any country is very small now. It's easy to take when the internet connection works. Few are more agile than our kids are. Everything we build have young Planet Pilots in the heart of the team. I warmly recommend you to involve kids when they show interest in your own work. This will give you many new agile voices, and I bet most of you are designing for that desirable future anyway, for their future. May the agile force be with you and with your children.
Wow, how beautiful is that? I am so impressed with the work you have done with these children and how you steered everything to these results. It is just amazing. I love that story. Um,
How can you not as a parent, right?
I know, right? It's like this is what we want to see: all the kids to be interested, all the kids to be involved, and everything.
And they want that as well. I can
Well,
tell you, right?
well, I think kids are way more curious than us.
Yeah.
We do something wrong when we grow up. We forget to be curious, and keeping that curiosity and keeping the childish way of looking in the world, I think, is beautiful.
Who's more agile than our kids when you think of
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
I think many years ago, I came to this insight that we're born agile, and unfortunately, all these actually bitten out of us by traditional educational system when we're forced to fit into the structure without even sometimes clear purpose, and sit through the lessons and follow the script, follow the plan versus responding to change. Thank you for that. I guess one of my favorite parts and main takeaways from your talk is not what you want to be when you grow up, but what you want to be today.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because literally, what stops you from doing it today?
Mhm. With that though, I want to go a little bit further, you are creating now for these kids a world of how to work, how to collaborate, how to solve problems. Do you think they will be hurt when they go to the real life, to these organizations that we have right now? Are our organizations prepared to accept employees like these children?
These are two very different questions, and the answers are going to be very different. Are the
Yeah.
organizations ready for somebody who's not been through a traditional educational journey?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, well, the majority are probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, we just heard JF's amazing story from Silicon Valley, where you're being hired based on your GitHub rating, not by your type of diploma or exam results. So the world is heading in a direction, in my opinion, where organizations are starting to appreciate that we are able to accomplish what we decide to try to accomplish together, and that we have empowering beliefs rather than the limiting beliefs that we tend to impose on our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what to the first part of your question, seen from the children's perspective, are they going to be hurt by meeting the reality? The One of the key objectives here is actually that any activity the kids are doing from day one, from childhood, happens in the real world. Everything happens in the real world, and the objective is not learning.
Mm-hmm.
Learning is a side benefit. The objective is that you make personal accomplishments in the real world as often as possible. We know from agile cycles that build, measure, learn, and
Mm-hmm.
make sure to iterate as much as you can, as often as you can. That's the fastest way to an acceptable result, and is no different in real life. That's how kids play, and they learn through playing. And we are just transferring that to real world problems, and helping each child personally connect to problems that they themselves care about, that they are passionate about solving. And then the rest is a journey which can
Mm-hmm.
take maybe the next 50 years, because some problems are really big. But if also we empower them to connect to each other, use new technologies, they're not new, but
Yeah.
better technologies, there's no limit to what they can really accomplish. Also, when they hit those organizations that may not be ready for this paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It really reminds me of Yellow Submarine movie and the quote from there, "It's all in your head." Um,
Yes.
right? Because when you mentioned abundance mindset, it feels like it really clicked for me. But also, you mentioned the immune response
Yeah.
from organizations and society. I'm wondering in which shapes or forms can this immune response come so
Yes.
that we can recognize it? Because I could imagine it does not always come as direct response. What should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, yeah, that's an excellent and very key question to all of this, because we can come up with great ideas, we can start implementing, because that's what we want. We want to see results. We want to learn from experimentation and these things. So what happens when the impact starts to hit the people it's supposed to hit out there and benefit them in a positive way? What happens? Now, immune systems is a very interesting phenomenon, right? I'll try to keep it short, but this is really interesting. We know it from our own body, how important it is in these COVID days. It's super important to have a strong immune system. It kills the bacteria, the viruses that we don't want to intrude into our system. Now, what happens in society, in human communities, in businesses, in any type of organization, is that if you bring up an idea, an initiative that seems to be disruptive, like, hey, that's not what we do here, or hey, this would be cannibalizing our own business. or or parents would say, hey, you're not the parent here, let me do the parenting, right? These are all immune system responses. and and we need to understand that they are important to have, and we cannot remove them, we can never eliminate them. And we shouldn't, because if you're a business, you need to protect and improve your business model, not disrupt it, because it's a revenue stream for you. So you need to find another way to create the next generation of your business, but don't do it here. Same in your family. You may want to kind of influence somehow the life of your children until they stop listening to you, which happens very, very quickly, by the way. I think all parents recognize that.
As soon as they learn no.
Yeah. Yeah, then they find other ways, which is fantastic. And so do we as innovators and as transformation agents, because we have to, because some of these problems are just too important not to be solved or not to be worked on. But to your question, immune system responses comes in many forms and shapes, and we all have them. Some days we have the yes hat on, like, hey, let's do it. And other days we have maybe a no hat, like, oh my goodness, we cannot do this. And that mindset is our own immune system speaking to us, like, hey, don't even try, Lars, don't even get out of bed. Changing education, you must be crazy, stop doing it, right? And so we have it at all levels, everywhere.
We can stay for hours with you. There are so many things in this topic, and with agile organizations becoming learning organizations, we can pull so many parallels and strings and lessons from you. But I think the time is up, and I just want to thank you for taking your time and for bringing these concepts and these lessons and sharing them with us. I think this community would benefit a lot. And we couldn't have a better story to share to close our first New Agile Voices session.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much
Lars.
for inviting me and for being awesome at arranging this fantastic initiative. Thank you so much. It's so important, in my opinion. And
Thank
thanks to JF, by the way. I connected very deeply with his way of expressing the feeling of empowerment. That's what we are trying to bring to children, by the way. Right?
you.
So he has a job offer on the table from the Planet Pilots
Ooh.
tomorrow morning.
See, this is community at its best.
Yes. I love how this program starts bringing the cross-pollination of ideas and pulling the wisdom and nuggets, these wisdom nuggets from all kind of directions, bringing them together and molding something absolutely new. So thank you once again for bringing us on a journey with Planet Pilots and sharing your story with us.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for having us.